A voice crackled through the phone, breathless and shaky. "You won't believe this. I just came back from McDonald's, and there's this woman. She's screaming for help. She says she's been trapped in the house next door for years with her daughter, kidnapped by the man who lives there." The dispatcher, trying to stay calm, urged the caller, "Sir, slow down. Is she still outside?" "Yeah, I see her. Please, we need police right now. I think she's been held captive for years." "Do you need police? Fire or ambulance?" "Police. Just get someone here. She says she's been missing for 10 years, and now she's finally free. Stay with her. Help is on the way. Make sure to talk to the officers when they arrive." "I will, but we need them now before he comes back." The chilling 911 call that you just heard was made in 2013. A woman had just broken free after nearly a decade of unimaginable horror, held captive inside an unassuming Cleveland home. Her desperate plea for freedom echoed through the neighborhood, sending shockwaves not only through Cleveland, Ohio, but across the world as dark and horrifying details of the House of Horrors began to unfold. It all began in 2002, when 21-year-old Michelle Knight disappeared. On August 23rd of that year, Michelle was on her way to attend a case management meeting regarding the custody of her 2-year-old son, Joey. Lost and unsure of her location, she encountered a man she recognized, Ariel Castro, the father of one of her friends. Trusting him would become the most devastating mistake of her life. Michelle's upbringing was marked by hardship. Her family struggled financially, and she claimed to have suffered abuse as a child and teenager. At 14, Michelle ran away, choosing to live on the streets instead of dealing with her troubled home. However, she eventually returned and resumed school. At 18, she became pregnant, allegedly after being assaulted, and gave birth to Joey. Despite her best efforts to be a good mother, she lost custody of her son after an incident involving her mother's boyfriend, where the man reportedly injured Joey, leading to the boy's placement in foster care. On the day Michelle disappeared, Castro offered her a ride to her custody hearing. Working as a school bus driver and local musician, Castro seemed trustworthy, especially because Michelle knew him through his children. Castro claimed that they could stop by his house to pick up a puppy for Joey before heading to the meeting. But once they arrived at his house, Castro struck. He overpowered Michelle, bound her with an extension cord, gagged her, and cruelly informed her that she would never see her son again. He ripped up the only photo she had of Joey. Castro chained Michelle in the basement and began a long ordeal of repeated abuse, leaving her no hope of escape. The horrors Michelle endured were unspeakable. Castro beat her daily, both physically and mentally. At one point, Castro even allowed her to have a pit bull puppy, but when the dog tried to protect Michelle, he unalived the puppy in front of her. This was yet another display of his total control and power over her life. Castro's house was a prison, and Michelle had no way of escaping. Castro lived alone, and although he had children, they did not live with him. Michelle's disappearance was not given much attention by the authorities, as they believed she had likely run away, especially since she had lost custody of Joey. This erroneous assumption may have severely hindered any efforts to find her, and just 15 months after her disappearance, her name was removed from the missing persons database. 7 months later, another young girl, Amanda Berry, was abducted. On April 21, 2003, the day before her 17th birthday, Amanda was walking home from her fast food job when Castro offered her a ride. Believing that he was a trustworthy figure, he was the father of a girl she knew. Amanda accepted. But once at his house, Amanda was also imprisoned. Like Michelle, Amanda was restrained and subjected to horrific abuse. Castro held her captive for days, leaving her in darkness with only a TV for company. Amanda's family immediately reported her missing, and Amanda watched on the TV as her mother and sister made public pleas for her safe return. Amanda spent years in captivity, bound and isolated. Castro taunted Amanda's family with phone calls, adding further cruelty to their grief. He once called Amanda's family, referring to her by her nickname, Mandy, to torment them. Although law enforcement managed to trace the phone call to within 2 blocks of Castro's house, They were unable to pinpoint his location and eventually gave up the search. Amanda continued to write in a diary, keeping her hopes of freedom alive. One of her entries read, "You never know what you've got till it's gone. I just can't wait to go home. I'm 17 now, but don't have a life." Even after Amanda learned of her mother's death in 2006, she continued to write her diary entries to her mother, addressing her as Mother in Heaven. Castro likely kept the women separate to prevent them from collaborating against him. He feared that if they communicated freely, especially when he wasn't present, they might plan to overpower him or discuss ways to escape. This loss of control was something Castro could not tolerate, as his entire operation was built around maintaining complete power over his captives. Control was the driving force behind all of Castro's actions. Despite already holding 2 women hostage, Castro's desire for domination didn't wane. In fact, a year after abducting Amanda, he sought out another victim. Castro even promised Amanda that if he managed to capture another girl, he would finally let her go. A manipulative lie. By this time, the thrill of Amanda's abduction had faded for Castro, and he craved the excitement that came with capturing a new victim. The more he thought about abducting someone, the more determined he became to act on it, seeking the same rush of power and control he had felt before. Each kidnapping made him more confident and dangerous. On April 2, 2004, just 5 blocks from where Amanda had been taken, Castro encountered someone he knew, 14-year-old Gina De Jesus. Gina had been walking home from school with Castro's daughter, Arlene, but when Arlene's mother said they couldn't hang out, Gina was left to walk home alone. Gina called her mother, informing her that she was on her way, but she never made it home. Arlene was the last person to see Gina before she vanished. Castro, who knew Gina's father, drove up to her and asked if she had seen Arlene. When Gina confirmed she had, Castro requested her help in finding his daughter. It didn't seem strange to Gina, so she got into the car with him, but instead of looking for Arlene, Castro drove Gina to his house. Once inside, he asked Gina to help him move some equipment, but then his demeanor shifted. He began grooming himself in front of her, trimming his eyebrows and mustache. Then he started inappropriately touching her. Gina, clearly frightened, told him he could go to jail for what he was doing, as she was so young. Castro told her she could leave but insisted that she use a different door, the basement door. Relieved at the chance to escape, Gina didn't question his instructions. However, once she entered the basement, Castro attacked, trying to chain her up. At first, the chains weren't tight enough, and Gina managed to get loose and attempted to flee. Castro, however, overpowered her after a struggle, during which she kicked him several times. Gina screamed for help, but Castro had turned up the radios in both the basement and living room to drown out her cries. He successfully restrained her and left her imprisoned in the basement. When Gina didn't return home, her mother, Nancy Ruiz, reported her disappearance to the police. Initially, investigators assumed Gina had run away, delaying the search for her. Twistedly, Castro joined the efforts to find Gina, pretending to be concerned and even helping distribute flyers. Since he was friends with Gina's father, Castro was able to stay close to the case without arousing suspicion. He even comforted Gina's mother at a vigil a year after her disappearance, all the while knowing exactly where Gina was. In the early weeks of Gina's captivity, Castro left her alone for the most part. But on May 7, 2004, he assaulted her for the first time, and the abuse continued regularly. He then chained Gina and Michelle together, forcing them to share a mattress during their entire captivity. Castro also subjected Amanda to similarly horrific conditions, keeping her in a small, filthy room with a bucket for a toilet. The women were routinely starved, tortured, and left in squalor, suffering from depression and sickness. Michelle was denied basic hygiene, going 8 months without a shower after her abduction, and was left naked with just a thin sheet during her first winter there. Castro played psychological games, manipulating the women by controlling their interactions. He forbade them from speaking to one another, sometimes even setting up barriers to physically keep them apart. Whenever he wasn't home, he would turn up the music to drown out any sound, preventing them from calling for help. Occasionally, Castro would pretend to leave the house to test whether they would attempt to escape, then sneak back in to check on them. His warnings were clear. If they tried to flee, he would unalive them. Castro used a system of rewards and deprivations to control the women further. He would give them small allowances of money or small gifts, creating a toxic domestic economy in which the women had to earn basic necessities. This tactic created divisions, especially between Amanda and Michelle. When Gina first arrived, Castro gave her the nicest room and allowed her to eat first, which sparked resentment between the captives. These calculated manipulations were designed to keep the women from uniting against him. Perhaps one of the cruelest moments came when Castro forced Gina to play Russian roulette with him. He gave her a fire weapon and told her the fire weapon was loaded with one bullet, and they would take turns pointing it at each other. Gina, feeling she had nothing left to lose, wanted to aim the fire weapon at Castro in the hopes of unaliving him. When she pulled the trigger, nothing happened. Michelle remained the most defiant of the captives, often talking back to Castro and refusing to call him by his name, instead referring to him as dude. Her resistance angered Castro, who frequently targeted her for extra abuse. Michelle later explained that Castro wanted to break her spirit, but he couldn't because she was already broken long before he took her. "You can't break someone who's already broken," she said. "You can only make them stronger." Despite their horrific conditions, the women held on to hope, each finding their own source of strength. They fantasized about unaliving Castro or finding other ways to resist him mentally, if not physically. Amanda, for example, kept a secret diary, recording the number of times Castro assaulted her in hopes that one day he would be held accountable. On May 23, 2004, Castro brought all three women together to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted, which featured the missing person cases of Amanda and Gina. For Gina, seeing her family's interview on television was especially painful. Though Castro had kept the women separate initially, they gradually began speaking to one another whenever they could, communicating through notes or pictures slid under doors. Despite their confinement, the women attempted to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. They occasionally danced, sang, and watched television together when Castro wasn't home. On rare occasions, Castro allowed the women outside but always made them wear disguises, such as helmets or wigs. When Amanda turned 20, she suspected she was pregnant. Unlike his treatment of Michelle, whom he forced to miscarry by beating her on multiple occasions, Castro allowed Amanda to carry her pregnancy to term. On Christmas Day 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter, Jocelyn, with Michelle's help. Castro sat in a rocking chair, reading a book on childbirth while Amanda struggled through labor. When Jocelyn was born, she wasn't breathing at first. Castro threatened to unalive Michelle if she didn't save the baby, but Michelle successfully resuscitated the child. Jocelyn's birth brought some joy to the captives, and she became a welcome distraction in their horrific lives. Though hidden from the outside world like her mother and the other women, Jocelyn was occasionally allowed outside, even accompanying Castro to the park or Sunday services. He referred to Amanda as his wife after Jocelyn was born, and bizarrely, he treated them all as if they were one twisted family. During Amanda Berry's captivity, she constantly feared that Castro might harm her daughter. One of the most surreal moments for the women occurred in August 2009, when they watched the breaking news of J.C. Dugard's escape after 18 years in captivity. The women were fascinated by J.C.'s story, and they eagerly followed any updates. It must have been an uncanny experience to see someone escape from a situation so similar to their own. Despite the parallels, when Castro commented on Philip Garrido, J.C.'s captor, he said, "That guy was crazy," seemingly dismissing any similarity between himself and Garrido. When one of the women remarked that what happened to J.C. was just like their situation, Castro asked if they were planning to write a book about it. Castro's sense of confidence was immense, possibly fueled by the belief that no one would ever discover the women in his house. He even had friends and family over on multiple occasions. During one visit, his daughter, Arlene, was at the house, and the women, hidden in the basement, came close to calling for help but were too terrified that Castro would unalive them if they did. In another instance, in 2010, Police raided the house next door, but again, the women were too afraid to alert anyone. During a family gathering, Castro hid the women inside a van. Close calls like these happened often, but the women remained trapped. Police investigating Gina de Jesus's disappearance initially looked into her friends, including Arlene Castro. Despite this, they never focused on Castro himself. Fernando Colon, Arlene's stepfather, claimed he told police they should investigate Castro, mentioning that Castro had a reputation for being violent, but no action was taken, and the FBI denied having any record of Colon's tip. Another close call occurred when Castro's other daughter, Angie, found a disturbing message on her answering machine. The message, possibly left from a pocket dial, featured the voice of a young woman shouting, "Get away from me!" Alarmed, Angie reported the message to the police, but they mistakenly traced it to another phone. Gina's mother later asserted that the call must have come from Castro. In 2012, a convicted life-taker named Robert Wolford falsely confessed to unaliving Amanda Berry, leading police to believe they had solved her case. Wolford passed a lie detector test and claimed he could lead investigators to Amanda's remains, giving her family hope for answers. The location Wolford directed them to was near where Amanda was being held, but no remains were found. Castro's brother, Pedro, who watched the excavation, scoffed at the effort, saying it was a waste of money. Everything changed on May 6, 2013. Castro's daughter, Jocelyn, had more freedom in the house than the captives, and that day she went downstairs, returning to Amanda with a startling realization. Daddy's nowhere around. More importantly, Amanda discovered that her bedroom door had been left unlocked for the first time. She wasn't sure if it was a test, but after 10 years in captivity, she seized the opportunity. Amanda went downstairs and confirmed that Castro was indeed gone. She approached the front door, which had an alarm, but it was the storm door beyond it that posed the real challenge. It was padlocked. Determined, Amanda managed to open the door just enough to stick her arm through and began screaming for help. Meanwhile, Gina feared Castro had caught Amanda, so in her terror, she urged Michelle to stay with her rather than try to assist Amanda. Outside, a neighbor, Aurora Marty, heard Amanda's cries. She approached the house and saw Amanda's arm sticking out from behind the door. Amanda told her, "I'm Amanda Berry." Marty, who didn't speak much English, initially thought this couldn't be true, as she believed Amanda was dead. Struggling with arthritis, Marty found it difficult to help Amanda pull the door open. At this point, another neighbor, Charles Ramsey, who had just returned from McDonald's, saw Amanda's arm and ran over. He tried pulling the door open but couldn't, so he kicked at it and instructed Amanda to do the same from the other side. Together, they managed to kick open the bottom panel of the storm door, allowing Amanda to crawl out with her 6-year-old daughter. Amanda immediately ran to a neighbor's house and called 911. Amanda's call came through at 5:52 p.m. with her breathless voice saying, "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years and I'm here. I'm free now." The dispatcher instructed her to stay with the neighbors and wait for the police. Meanwhile, Amanda remained terrified that Castro would return at any moment, even though she was surrounded by people. 2 minutes later, at 5:54 p.m., police arrived. They were greeted by a woman holding a small child, and they quickly realized the gravity of the situation. This was no false information. Amanda Berry, the girl from the missing person flyers, was standing before them. Amanda then informed the police that she wasn't alone. There were others still trapped inside the house. 2 officers forced their way through the door Amanda had escaped from. Inside, they searched the basement but found nothing. Then, one officer ascended the stairs and called out, "Cleveland Police." Michelle, unsure of what was happening, summoned the courage to open her door and found the officer standing there. Overcome with relief, she ran into his arms, crying, "You saved me, you saved me," and begged him never to let her go. As the officer continued to search the house, Gina de Jesus emerged from another room. The officer relayed the news, "We found them, we found them." For the first time since their abduction, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina were free. Michelle, now 32 years old, Amanda, 27, and Gina, 23, were finally outside the house that had been their prison for so many years. Shortly after, police broadcast a description of Castro's vehicle, and he was located at a McDonald's parking lot. Castro was arrested at 6:16 p.m. with one of his male relatives in the car with him. Initially, police also arrested Castro's brothers, Pedro and O'Neill, on suspicion of kidnapping, but they were later released. Investigators stated that there was no evidence that either brother had any knowledge of the women being held captive. The rescue made international headlines. Instead of celebrating her newfound freedom, Michelle was rushed to the hospital, complaining of chest pains and difficulty breathing. Weighing just 84 pounds, she was severely malnourished, and doctors later discovered she had a bacterial infection in her stomach that would have killed her within days had she not been rescued. Michelle's time in captivity left her with lifelong physical and psychological scars. The repeated beatings inflicted by Castro permanently damaged her facial bones, and her eyesight was irreparably harmed after years spent in the dark. On one occasion, Castro broke her jaw with a barbell. Most tragically, Castro's assaults left Michelle unable to have children, as he had violently forced her to miscarry multiple times. Despite these unimaginable hardships, Michelle's will to survive remained strong throughout her ordeal, as she found strength in the thought of her son. Following their rescue, Castro's house was boarded up. Neighbors came forward with stories of strange happenings at the house on Seymour Avenue. One woman, Elsie Centrone, who lived nearby, claimed her daughter had once seen a naked woman crawling in Castro's backyard and reported it to the police. Another neighbor, Israel Lugo, recalled hearing banging noises from inside Castro's house and called the police in 2011. But the officers who responded left after knocking and receiving no answer. Despite these close encounters, Castro had managed to maintain a facade of normalcy, appearing as a happy, respectable man in the neighborhood. He was even known for taking children on motorcycle rides, further cementing his guise as a trustworthy figure. However, beneath this exterior lay a man responsible for unspeakable horrors, a man whose reign of terror nearly went unchecked for over a decade. In 2004, while working as a bus driver, Ariel Castro faced charges of child endangerment and abduction. The allegations stemmed from an incident where he reportedly left a 13-year-old boy alone on the bus. After returning to the bus, Castro allegedly drove it to Wendy's and told the boy to lay down, "Bitch," while he went inside to eat. Castro denied using that language, claiming he simply forgot the boy was there and didn't check the bus before leaving. He was suspended for 60 days, but the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. In 2012, he was fired from his job after leaving the bus unattended in a fire lane for hours. In addition to his professional misconduct, there was a long history of domestic violence allegations against Castro, dating back to 1989, involving his common-law wife, Grimilda Figueroa. In one police report, Figueroa accused Castro of slapping her after she asked where he was going. When she tried to escape, he slammed her into a wall and a washing machine, resulting in injuries to her shoulder and arm. In another incident, Castro allegedly stomped on her head with boots on in front of their children, causing her son to flee. When police arrived, Castro attempted to escape but was apprehended. A court petition revealed that Figueroa had suffered numerous injuries over the years, including a broken nose, broken ribs, dislocated shoulders, and the loss of a tooth. She also developed a brain tumor, believed to be caused by the repeated head trauma she endured. Despite filing multiple police reports, Figueroa never pressed charges against Castro, reportedly due to his threats to unalive her and their children. This is a common issue in domestic violence cases, where victims often become uncooperative due to fear or psychological conditions like battered woman syndrome. Police and prosecutors try to gather as much evidence as possible in these situations, so they can pursue charges even if the victim later refuses to cooperate. While it's more difficult to secure a conviction without the victim's testimony, it is still possible with sufficient evidence. After Amanda Berry's daring escape in 2013, Castro was finally brought to justice. At his trial, Castro tried to claim he was not a monster, but rather someone with a sickness, blaming his addiction to adult content. He denied the allegations of abuse, even claiming that his interactions with the women were consensual. He admitted to terminating Michelle's pregnancies but tried to argue that these decisions were mutual. Castro refused to fully accept responsibility for his actions, attempting to deflect blame and excuse his behavior. During the trial, Castro's defense entered a not guilty plea, hoping to avoid the death penalty. Ultimately, Castro was sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years after pleading guilty to 937 counts of kidnapping and assault. Each offense related to his horrific treatment of the women was charged separately, resulting in the massive sentence. Despite the extensive sentence, Castro never served much time. Less than 2 months into his imprisonment, he was found dead in his cell on September 3, 2013, after unaliving himself by hanging. Jail records indicated that Castro had been placed on special observation due to concerns he might harm himself. Having lost all control in prison, Castro couldn't handle the total loss of power over his surroundings. His body was discovered kneeling with a bed sheet tied around his neck and attached to a window hinge. Oddly, his shorts were found around his ankles, leading to initial speculation that his death may have been caused by autoerotic asphyxiation. However, it was later determined that Castro's shorts had simply slipped down due to weight loss during his time in prison. In his final note, Castro cited scripture and wrote about his love for his children and grandchildren, decorating the page with hearts, flowers, and music notes. While his death brought an end to the possibility of Castro serving his full sentence, it also marked the end of a terrifying chapter for the women he had held captive for more than a decade. The 3 survivors, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, faced immense challenges reintegrating into society. They each suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, after years of abuse. Michelle, who was held the longest, spoke publicly about her ordeal, emphasizing the strength she gained from surviving. She later changed her name to Lily Rose Lee and wrote 2 books about her life in captivity, Finding Me and Life After Darkness. Despite her hopes of reuniting with her son, she did not regain custody. However, his adoptive parents continue to send her updates and photos. Amanda has since focused on raising her daughter, Jocelyn, in a healthy and safe environment, while Gina went back to school and obtained her driver's license, something she had long dreamed of. Amanda and Gina collaborated on a book, Hope, which they published in 2015, and they remain friends. However, their relationship with Michelle became fractured over time, in part due to the psychological manipulation Castro had used to turn them against each other during their captivity. Today, all 3 women have dedicated their lives to helping others. Michelle founded Lily's Ray of Hope, an organization that supports victims of abuse by providing housing, clothing, and education. Amanda began hosting a segment on Cleveland's missing persons cases, and Gina became an ambassador for the Northeast Ohio Amber Alert, as well as founding the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults. Despite their painful pasts, the women continue to prove their resilience and courage through their work, turning their trauma into advocacy and support for others in need. This harrowing story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope can still be found. The strength of Michelle, Amanda, and Gina serves as a powerful testament to human resilience and the will to survive. Their bravery helped bring light to a nightmare and ensured that justice was served. If you or anyone you know is a victim of abuse, please don't hesitate to seek help. There are resources available that can provide support and guidance. No one should have to endure the kind of horror these women live through. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay safe, stay aware, and always look out for those who need a voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories that shed light on the power of survival and justice.